Welcome to part 2 of our tour of Rainforest, Flora in Torres, California with Paul Isley. Hello there, I'm Barry Landau. I'm here today at Rainforest, Flora Incorporated, one of my favorite nurseries in the world. We're going to spend some time with Paul Isley talking about different kinds of tillandsias.
When I give people tours of our nursery, this is one of the places I like to stop because this clump here is an emblem of how tillandsias grow. It's a perfect example of how they grow. We glued one plant on here when we built the nursery some 10 or 11 years ago. That plant has now multiplied into this vegetative clump. It's called Tillandsia heteromorpha. And up close you can see how it's rooted to the rock. And that's what tillandsias do if they get good conditions. If you glue them on or attach them in some way and they get the humidity and the light and all of that and they grow, they will root onto whatever they're growing on. Now also here you can see other tillandsias like this clump here, and if I reach around you can see these little volunteers that are just starting to grow. And behind here up on top, these little seedlings are only 2 or 3 months old. They're just starting to grow and to root onto the rocks. But again, the seeds they blow around on the ambient air and then they attach to things and they start growing. This one is called Tillandsia stricta hardleaf. You can see how beautiful the inflorescence is on that one. And it's just coming into bloom naturally. This is a clump of Tillandsia ionantha. And people say, oh, I want to get this one because of the red color. Well, Tillandsia ionantha is usually green. But when it blooms, it turns bright red. But sometimes, just in bright light and humidity, they can get a lot of red color anyway. So this is red just growing. This one on top is a little more red. It may be getting ready to bloom. When they come into bloom, they get an even more intense and bright red than when they're like this.
And Paul, you have a number of different varieties of ionantha. But what I'm curious about is, even these seedlings or volunteers, you grow a high percentage of your plants for sale from seed, unlike many nurseries.
Yes, that's the main form that we use to reproduce the plants. You know, the industry for these plants is based on plants that come out of the natural environment. And we stopped doing that. The last time we brought plants in was 1993. So we've got 18 years under our belts of self-producing plants that take 6 to 25 years for us to grow. Not an easy thing to do, but it is the way that we do it. And if you look over on the side over here, you can see racks that have tillandsias growing on them. And those are all seedlings that we're producing. And since we started doing this in the early 1980s, we now have a pretty good supply of plants that we've grown ourselves. Well, this is a sample, for instance, of a plant called Tillandsia Zerographica. It's a beautiful plant. It's small still, but it's probably 10 years old. Eventually, it can get to be almost 2 feet across with many, many leaves.
And I understand, Paul, that currently, because of removal from the habitat, Tillandsia Zerographica is endangered or extinct.
It's the Dutch just sent a commission to Guatemala, and the report stated that the plants are virtually extinct in nature. They're 1 or 2 per square kilometer, which is not a self-sustaining amount of plants. The nurseries there have hillsides covered with these, and they are trying to reproduce them artificially from offsets or from seeds. The problem is that the statistics of how many plants are in cultivation compared to the plants that are being sold around the world, there's no way that those plants are being all artificially propagated. At the same time, there aren't really very many more they can collect from nature. So they're going to have to reproduce them artificially. Ours are all completely grown from seed. We got these originally in the early 1980s, and we've been growing them ever since. And it's the nice thing about the seedlings is that they have more leaves and more roots than plants that you break off as offsets. The Zerographica is a great plant. Most all the plants you see here we've grown from seeds. So now we're going to go up to one of the major features in the nursery. Let's go for a walk. All right, this is the main water feature that we have here at Rainforest, Flora, Torrance, California. And we built this big Rockscape waterfall area specifically to show people the kinds of things they can do with the plants and to show people how they grow vertically in nature, whether it's on a rock or a cactus or a tree. It doesn't really make any difference. It's the light and the water the plants get that they can absorb through their leaves that make the difference. In front here you see this giant clump of Tillandsia funkiana that I showed you the little plant earlier, and that clump is over 40 years old. We haven't had it for 40 years. We've only had it for 4 or 5 years, but it started from one plant some 40 plus years ago. And around on the Rockscapes you can see the different tillandsias and other plants growing on the rocks. Up above in the pots we have a huge Eichmea called Blanchettiana. And with time they get bright color, they get very large red inflorescences, and they make a terrific landscaping plant here in Southern California. As Eric pans around, Barry handed me a beautiful Tillandsia Zerographica.
So Paul, that would be like 25 years old or something?
Probably at least, yes. And it doesn't mean that people can't grow them faster. It just means that that's how long it takes us to grow them. But what a wonderful creation this one is. I mean, it's just an incredible plant. And the inflorescence, it blooms for almost a year. It's very tall, oranges and yellows and greens, and the flowers are purple.
And this one will have a couple pups and reproduce itself within a year or two.
This will have 2 or 3 offsets that will grow for the next 2 or 3 years before they bloom, and the plants keep going. And Tillandsia Zerographica, one of the magnificent Tillandsias, sitting next to Alcantaria imperialis. This used to be called the Varesia, one of the larger, more magnificent bromeliads. And when we get outside in front of the greenhouse, I'll show you one that's blooming right now. The plant is nowhere near as large as this one, but you'll see what the inflorescence will look like when it blooms. So now we'll move on just a few feet. And here, among some very rare cycads, is a beautiful display of Tillandsia tectorum, the white fuzzy one, Tillandsia ionantha, the red one, and other tillandsias that give a very good way of how people can decorate with these wonderful plants. Again, the great feature of tillandsias is that they can be used without any soil to decorate your vertical spaces. So here you see, for instance, we have a piece of grapewood, and we have the tillandsia clumps. Now, these were started a few years ago from just one plant each, and now they've grown and they've turned into these nice clumps. And the Spanish moss just is an added feature. It just kind of hangs and grows, and over time it naturalizes, it blows around, and it just spreads, just like it does in nature. This is a beautiful purple leaf philodendron that grows up over the rocks, and it roots onto the rocks. You can see the many roots from the past. As it gets larger and starts to take over, we chop it back, take cuttings, we grow them out, and then people can get those. This is one of the nicer display areas of the nursery. And now we're ready to move on again. Okay, here we are at the back end of the retail area. This is where we grow our staghorn ferns. We have the largest selection of different cultivars and species available in the United States. Over 30 different kinds. And as you can see, the staghorns put out vegetative offsets as they grow over time and grow new plants. This cultivar is named after Mulford Foster, the great horticulturalist from Florida. And you can see how many offsets have started on this one. This is really special. And then way up high you can see the Platycerium superbums. Staghorn ferns are in the genus Platycerium. And the ones up above, the Platycerium superbums, are native to Australia. They grow high up in eucalyptus trees in their forests. And that one does not offset. You have to grow that one from spores. The regular staghorn ferns, when you have the brown spore patches on the bottom of the fertile fronds, that's normal. This is one of the two ways they reproduce. By putting out the offsets that I talked about a few minutes ago, and by producing the spores like this. So these reproduce both ways, but the superbums, the ones up above, only reproduce by the spores. So they're more expensive and more rare because it's not such an easy thing to do. We also have some cycads back here, and for our nursery, the mother of all cycads is this Cycas rumphii that we have right here. We've had this over 30 years, and it's just the trunk is 6 feet tall, about 2 meters. It's in the genus Cycas. It has naked seeds. Most of the cycads have cones, but the Cycas all have naked seeds. This is a female. Cycads and ferns were on Earth before flowers were invented. They're very ancient forms of plant life. Color didn't really come in on the Earth until flowers were invented, and the flowers came in to turn colors to attract animal pollinators. So before that, it was a very green world, and the staghorn ferns are all green, and the cycads are all green. Although interestingly, some of the cones on the cycads are brilliantly colored. And just gorgeous in their own right. So we'll move on to the next area. We've got a great waterfall to show you. Yeah. This is a giant koi pond. This is the back side of the waterfall. We have a giant street called Hawthorne Boulevard that comes along the side of the nursery. We are now on the Hawthorne side of the nursery, so between the sounds of the trucks and the cars and the ambient sounds of the waterfalls, there's quite a bit of background noise. So please just bear with us. But you can see how the rocks hold the tillandsias, and they just grow and multiply over time. And then we have this giant gold leaf philodendron that was small when we put it here a few years ago. But it's really growing and taking a life of its own now. You can see the koi down here love to eat, just like animals everywhere. So they're here saying hello. And if I had a handful of fish food, I'd throw it to them and they'd just chomp it down.